Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Mike Meriton, co-founder and COO of the EDM Council, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Rehan Jalil, the CEO of Securiti, a leader in unified data controls for hybrid cloud. Welcome, Rehan. How are you?
It's great. It's great to be talking together, Mike.
So let's dig in, Rehan. First question I'd like to start with, if it's good with you, is what are the challenges and opportunities that cloud brings for CDOs?
Mike, as we all are experiencing, the data is growing at a staggering pace. And in fact, this acceleration. Data is creating just more data. That, along with it, actually brings the massive opportunities and the dangers along with it. And we know that the different kinds of value that needs to be derived from this data, and it requires different kind of analysis. What cloud really brings is just massive scale and an auto scale, where you're not managing these systems. There are many of these managed systems for you. Also, because the value that we're trying to derive from data is different for different use cases. The innovation that's happening in the cloud gives you all the tools and technologies to apply the most appropriate type of data systems, the most appropriate type of techniques, and the software that is coming bundled as part of the cloud itself. Also, you will see the public clouds have global footprint. If you want to grow your presence, it's quite easy to actually go global, so to speak. Another important thing is the automation that enables within the cloud. There are layers and layers of automation that along the way. So certainly, as we're seeing a massive growth of data, the public clouds do provide us the opportunity along the way. Now, having said that, just like we say, data is the new oil. Well, oil, of course, gives you all the energy and many other energy sources, but if you don't handle it properly, it can burn you also. Similarly with data. It does bring with its own challenges and perils. And essentially, part of the reason is if your data is going to be spread out and going to be more spread out in a wide variety of systems along the way, there's going to be the sprawl of data. And this data will be mixed with a lot of sensitive information along the way. Secondly, because of all the automations, the data can move really fast. So if a mistake happens in how the data is being put in place or how it is being configured, how it's being given access, that those issues can also move very fast along the way across different environments. So another layer of automation is needed to understand if those things are going on. Also, data can go to different geographies if it can move that fast. It can go to different subsidiaries. It can go to your partners at a different scale, at a different pace. That can bring its own issues with respect to controls or lack of controls that can have, and regulatory concerns that it can bring along.
Yeah, Rehan.
On one hand,
yeah, I'm sorry.
Data, go ahead.
I was going to say that you've hit a big topic, which I think companies that operate in different jurisdictions are subject to different data sovereignty requirements. And so I think that is one of the bigger, for anyone that's involved in multiple jurisdictions, that's a hot issue.
It's actually, especially for multinationals, which actually have a requirement to collect data from different places, or they have data from people from different places, or they have a footprint. And it's very easy to actually have this data moving without knowing cross-border issues and data sovereignty issues can be there. And if it's easy to do within multi-cloud and cloud, it brings its own dangers. Also, data exists for a purpose. Cloud enables very easy sharing, but at the same time, easy sharing really means that more mistakes can happen. So these are, I would say, on one hand, these are no question the ripe opportunity to utilize the multi-cloud as long as there is realization that there could be challenges and perils along the way, and systems are put in place. Now, another big thing, which is the obligations around data, right? When you have data, those obligations typically happen in four different areas. First, of course, no question, you have to keep it secure. The second, responsible use of data. And we will talk in our session, what is responsible use of data actually really means in terms of entitlements, in terms of the access that is given around the data, how you share the data, who do you share the data with. We talked about cross-border and data sovereignty, and privacy is another very important, because directly touches the consumer and consumer sentiment and the trust that you actually can build along the way. These are, of course, generic concerns, which can be more accelerated with the growth and the spread of data within the multi-cloud. I think the opportunity here is to utilize the multi-cloud. If you can bring a layer of unification, that unification of visibility across your very diverse footprint, which is going to be there, and that's where the direction is headed, that visibility of exactly what kind of data is where, who has access to it, how we're sharing it, across all these diverse cloud environments and diverse systems. And similarly, the unification of controls along the way, right? So literally, which I want to summarize it, these challenges are absolutely, you can take control of it if there is unification of data intelligence on top of all the data systems spread across these diverse environments, and unification of data controls kind of along the way.
So Rehan, I'll share a short story and then move on to the question. It's the company spend a lot of time and investment into their on-prem environments. And we've heard stories where important data was lifted and shifted into cloud, but because of concern of security, all of it had to be 100% encrypted and very difficult to get access to, almost defeating the value of bringing that data into the cloud into the first place. So the idea, I think, if I'm getting this right, it'd be good to go into this next topic of the unification of data intelligence and what this means. But it seems that if there are not a series of controls, it's going to be hard to really get the value out of the data in cloud while having trust that you're doing it at the right level and the right granularity of control. So with that, what is this new era of unification of data intelligence? What does that really mean?
So I think because fundamentally, the data is going to be spread out, because you will try to utilize the most appropriate clouds and most appropriate SaaS services, most appropriate data clouds to create value from this data. It means it's spread out fundamentally. And to make use of it, you're sharing it with your teams, you're sharing it with third parties, you're sharing with your partners. Without knowing exactly what kind of data is where, it's very hard to it's impossible to have controls, because if you don't know where the data is, there's no way to actually have controls. Right. And because it's spread out, there has to be one place where somebody can go and have clear visibility across very diverse environments, where exactly is my data, what type of data along the way. So, and unification is at multiple levels. It's not just at the system level. And I would explain what those are. First, there has to be a common way to discover, auto-discover, auto-classify with a common grammar, regardless of where data is. Instead of going to one cloud, one data cloud, and trying to classify in a different way, or going to one SaaS and classify in a different way, that would be the exact wrong thing to do, because now you're managing every environment on its own ways, and there is no one common grammar and one common way to discover the data along the way. And it cuts across private cloud, public cloud, data cloud, SaaS. The second thing is the type of data system. Often people have done a bit of a cataloging, even if it's manual, on the structured systems. But data, as we know, is not just structured. There's volume. With respect to volume, most of the data is unstructured. So that unification has to happen. One common way to look at structured data, unstructured data, and also streaming data that is not sitting, it's moving, right, between your own teams, between the subsidiaries, between third parties. And as you mentioned, Mike, that people are bringing the data into the public cloud, doing lift and shift. And many of this is happening without changing the app architecture. The non-native data systems from open source are ending up in the public cloud. There has to be one way to look at it, whether the data system is being provided by the public cloud provider, or you brought it through lift and shift or through open source or your licensed software that you brought into the environment. So it has to be unification of one way to look at it. And then a common way to catalog it. And when I say catalog, it's not just for structured. You have to have a common way to catalog for unstructured, catalog for moving data, the streaming data, the data in motion. Because structured data, no question, you catalog, you create more value because that's where all the BI and analytics happen. But underneath it, if you really want to drive the value, there has to be catalog for unstructured data as well as catalog and clear understanding of the data that is moving. And as we said, if the data is moving fast, where is data coming from? Where is it going? People give different names, lineage and all. You need to know that how is this data going across the systems? And knowing this data is just a starting point. The context of the data is even more important as we go towards obligations around privacy, residency, breaches. And the most fundamental thing for privacy is for the people's information. Because privacy is about the right of a single individual. We need to know this data is tied to which consumer, whether directly ours or maybe some of our downstream enterprises consumer. And for that consumer, where is the data? Is very important. That context is important because that context will give you the residency, and residency will give you related regulations that need to be applied, right? And based on that, you can see who should have access to the data, who should not have access to this data. Similarly, retention policy is an important context. The consent of the person and the legal purpose for which the data is being collected, that's a very important context. And who has the visibility with respect to sharing. So essentially what we're saying is that when we talk about data intelligence, is not just about the type of data and the automated way of actually putting it all together in one place, but also the context has to be tied together. Otherwise, you cannot take decisions. What is the right thing to do with this data? And if you would be violating these things along the way.
So Rehan, you've framed a lot of issues and opportunities that cloud, multi-cloud, would bring to companies, but also there's a lot of things to take into consideration. That's what I'm struck just listening to all the issues you've raised. How much of the data intelligence and control could be or should be automated?
The question really is that how do you establish that unification? And historically, if you look at various ingredients of unification or visibility, I should be saying, and controls, many of these were a mix of manual and a mix of maybe a bit of an automation. As we move forward, there has to be, I would say, as close to all automated, and there's no reason for it not to be. And we'll talk about that why. Often the journey starts with discovery of data systems. You often don't know which data systems exist in our environments, whether it's in a particular cloud, whether developers have brought in some new apps and the data systems exist and the value you want to drive and controls you want to drive because for that visibility. So discovery of data systems is the beginning of the automation. Anytime a new data system pops up in your multi-cloud, it should be automatically discovered. And you should have an automated way of taking action to bring into your fold, whether asking people to understand what's the purpose of it, or whether you are adding to your catalogs, so to speak. Once you understand the data system, it's of course to derive value of the data, have to know what's inside the data system, what kind of data is in there, what data sets are there, and there also we talk that it should not just be structured systems. It should be the common way of doing it in an automated fashion to discover what data system even exist in the environment, right? And those data systems or the data has to be for both structured, unstructured, as well as data that's streaming between systems and maybe even between the companies along the way. And once you understand what kind of data is inside the systems, it's important to bring into a catalog, or a catalog which is not only for the structured, but actually gives you visibility, both structured, unstructured, and streaming environments. So across the entire landscape of your data, you have visibility. And how much of it's sensitive information that is kind of mixed up with the business data that's actually there, because then you can establish controls across these systems. Also, movement of data. Instead of asking people questions how this data is moving, or asking people to go manually tag these things in the catalogs, important to know on a more automated fashion, where did the data come from? Where is it going into our intermediate systems? And where is ending up, and who has access to it? Now, while we're analyzing the data for the type of data and that's within these platforms, important to know the consumers and which consumers are actually in, or the data tied to those consumers is actually sitting in these environments. And it is extremely important for global regulations, because all global regulations are tied to a consumer, not just tied to the type of data, but it's very important to know which consumers are in there. And it could be your employees, it could be your partners, as long as there's a human being involved. And if there's personal information, you need to know whose information is that. Why? Because from there you can extract the residency. From there you can extract the regulations, and it has to be automated, not manual tagging and doing manual ways of doing it. Because once you establish that in place, you can automate variety of other things on top of it, including individual rights fulfillment, including consent changes. And if the consent changes for a single consumer, you can go back in an automated fashion, change the backend systems in an automated fashion. What you can do with this data if the consent is already changed without violating a variety of different regulations around the way. Your obligations around notifications change, depending on which geography this person is actually belonging to. So without knowing it, you really cannot automate it. And once you know it, all these automations are actually possible. Also, regulation mapping. Can you look at from the lens of a regulation, not looking from the lens of data, not looking from the lens of person? Can you look purely from the lens of regulation, that for which regulation there is compliance and for which regulation there's an issue, and it can go deep down to explain the root cause, or as close to the root cause as possible if there is violations tied to a regulation in an automated fashion. It is absolutely needed, and it's possible along the way. And needless to say, the quality data, understanding the quality data along the way is important. Access understanding is where most of the issues happen. When you have data, and now if it's available to everyone within the organization, for the subsidiaries, and maybe you have third parties, consultants who are doing analysis on data, and if the privileges and entitlements are not handled properly, that can really become one of the most dangerous things, where you actually have almost no controls, or your lacks of controls are there. Without automation, there is no way to actually manage it, because there is so much data, so many people, internal and external, who are trying to get access to it. To automate a way to understand who should have entitlement, and maybe figuring out entitlement should be revoked along the way. Similarly, privacy requires you to actually have a variety of different data mapping, ROPA reports, process understanding how the data is actually moving. Most of it can actually benefit from this automation, and most of it can be created from all the data that's coming underneath in an automated fashion. So literally, I would say when you go towards the multi-cloud, it does provide you the frameworks, but as long as there's a layer on top of it, which stitches it all together, bring it to one common data command center, where you have intelligence and where you actually have controls. I think you can utilize the multi-cloud in the most beneficial ways possible.
So, Rehan, thank you for covering the fact that if you bring together a series of controls and they are automated, then you have the ability to dial in the absolute right level of entitlement, access, privacy. So depending on your business use case, you can actually get the most value out of your data without compromising trust or any local privacy laws. And some good news for the audience, and Rehan, we've talked about this in the earlier segment, that over 100 companies came together, including the top 4 cloud companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, and many others, to work for a year and a half on a common framework for managing data and sensitive data in cloud and multi-cloud. And this is called the CDMC, or the Cloud Data Management Capability Framework. In fact, a picture to share with our audience right now, and hopefully that has come up on the screen at this point, is you'll see in the center, these are the 6 major components of the framework. And Rehan, you've mentioned, everything has to start first with governance and accountability. It then moves to everything must be cataloged and classified. It then sets up your accessibility and usage, your protection and data privacy. Of course, you need to manage data through its entire life cycle, including any transformations, and track the lineage, and the component 6 of data and technical architecture. Then you'll see on the outer ring 14 controls that should be automations for protecting all forms of sensitive data. In the top right, you'll notice these are all of the definitions you would find in major data privacy regulations like GDPR or CCPA, and also in across different industries like personal health information in the life science and health industries and others. So good news for the audience. This is a framework you can now look at as a target operating environment for multi-cloud, and you can download this right off of the EDM Council, our security website at edmcouncil.org under CDMC or cloud. So here's the question, I guess, Rehan, for you at this point, which is, okay, this is great. It's a framework, but now we got to get into how does this really help, and how would you bring this into your business to make it useful? And then in our final segment, we're going to talk about how do you operationalize this?
I think one of the biggest things what CDM's CDMC framework has done is to bring clarity, not in isolation, but also by bringing the most sophisticated data architects, the cloud architects, and the cloud companies and the technology companies, and really bring clarity and on what needs to be monitored and what needs to be controlled. I think it's a phenomenal foundation on which can provide a guideline. And every company will look at it as a framework and then say they will adjust things that the things that they want to pick up on. It's a phenomenal starting point. Having said that, it's a framework. Now you have to operationalize it. How do you operationalize it? This is a great theory. Now, if you would want to take this as a guideline, but then operationalize this from the data intelligence piece, the controls, and the controls piece side of things. I think so. That's exactly you will see in our follow-on segment, that how you can take this framework and pick up on the things that you really want to operationalize, and how do you actually operationalize it in an automated fashion?
Right.
Because the way the data is growing, and the way the complexity is increasing, and how many people would have access to this data within the organization and outside the organization, automation is the name of the game.
In this segment, we move to that final mile of how do you operationalize these controls, these automations, to really get the most out of your multi-cloud and hybrid cloud environments. So, Rehan, let's start with that, which is, we've had some great discussions so far. How do you go and implement this? I mean, that's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, I think we talked in last few sessions about the need of intelligence and unification of intelligence and unification of controls. What we wanted to talk about is like why each even having controls, right? Because at the end, you're collecting data, you're trying to make the most use of it, different departments, different BUs trying to make use of this data. Like why is controls so much is needed? I will draw an analogy and then go straight back into data side. If you were transporting oil or any form of energy like electricity, and at the end, you're trying to benefit, people are trying to benefit from it. But if you didn't have controls around it, it would be very dangerous. Data is no different. And it's actually a bigger problem because it can move faster in a more wild ways. It can end up in wrong places before you know it. And it can create significant issues for the enterprise. So the question is, when you're trying to share all this data internally and externally, could you actually have guarantees in place, maybe without even your team even knowing it, that they can actually share this information They can use this information in the most effective ways, because as an organization, you have put guardrails around this data, right? And it is automated. When your data analysts or data scientists, when they want to get access to this data, their managers and peers, they don't have anxiety. Should I say, yes, go ahead, click here and they'll get access to it? Or am I going to be going looking and figuring out what damage is going to be done, right? Could the guardrails be more automated in place? That's what really this is about. That how do you enable much more rapid innovation? How much ease of sharing without having the anxiety of making a mistake and actually making a mistake? So really, we will just talk a bit about how these things can be enabled for rapid innovation. I'll give you some examples. Let's say if you want to share data with your own internal teams or your third-party teams who are doing analysis on this data. They are not outside the company. They may be in different geographies. Could there be ways where you have put in place where, first of all, you know exactly out of this sense of this data sets, what is sensitive and what is not sensitive, right? Could you have guardrails in place where automatically, based on the roles and permission, based on the roles of those people and their entities, the sensitive information automatically will be not shared without you even doing much as a business owner, kind of owner of this data, because the guardrails are in place. Those guardrails will look at the role of the person, maybe their location of where they're coming from or where they are, and the type of data, and automatically it will actually prevent the access to the data types, not just the data system, but the very specific attributes of the data. That level of, if you can put that level of automation, of intelligence and controls, what it does is that it enables massive data sharing without breaking anything, right, along the way. This is simply one example. Now, what it can drive, it can make sure that you're not bringing any cross-border issues, geo-residency issues, internally, the data that should not have been shared with a subsidiary, and especially in large organizations, is not being shared. Privacy could be very important. What type of data was seen by who, which individual? There is no reason for a certain type of data about a specific individual, their personal life, to be seen by people inside the company, or in machine learning models, picking those personal attributes and having a bias being established, because now there is data that your machine learning models will utilize it without even knowing it, because often it's very hard to tell. If you feed the data to machine learning models and AI engines, they will utilize it. So I think that's where the unification of data controls and automation of it enables you to make the best use of the data without having the anxiety and fear and actually making mistakes.
Okay, so Rehan, what I'm picking up is the investment and the availability of automated controls does the opposite of locking all your data down. It actually enables it to be used in the right context with the right amount of trust to assure that you're never misusing data, and the automations assure that, so then you can take on more use cases. So it's sort of the opposite of lock it down. It opens it up under the right context, under the right legal permissions to use this data. And that is exciting, I think, for the audience. So is that, in the reduction of risk and meeting regulatory compliance, does this help you? And what's your take on that?
Yeah, exactly right. I think, as you exactly rightly pointed, if you don't have that level of sophistication, there would be a big hammer put on the data, or encrypt everything, or block the access, and put very meticulous processes around the data who can share it. It slows everyone down.
Yeah.
The flip of it is that if there is enough intelligence around data in an automated fashion and with a high efficacy, and automated controls and guardrails are there in the foundational layers of where the data is sitting, then above it, without much fear and anxiety, you can actually enable the sharing, enable innovation, and so forth, and monitor these things, right? Now, it has two important reasons. One is, this is the right thing to do. You do not want this data to be going into wrong places and wrong hands, and all your machine learning models creating biases based on the sensitive personal information that's been fed into those models, right? On the other hand, there is severe, external risks, and I'll put them in two different categories. One, security teams would care more about, but again, as a part of the organization, CDOs also care about, that this data should not end up in the hands of hackers. Because if you look at any news element out there, the hackers are going after the data most of the time. I mean, there is some disruptive hackers, but most of the time, they're trying to go after this exact same data, which is the crown jewels of the company. So hopefully, in collaboration with your security teams, you can make sure this data is actually secure, is not ending up in the hands of the cyber attackers and so forth. Having said that, the other important aspect is regulatory compliance. And regulatory compliance, gone are the days when we could do this with manual surveys. When people would ask, like, what kind of data is here, or using manual tagging, where people are assigned to say, hey, can you actually classify this data? The volume is so high, that things are changing so fast, and the data is moving so fast, there has to be clear visibility in automated fashion. What does it enable if it's automated? The compliance and the risk reduction aspect of it is also automated on top of it, because now you're taking all the signals that are coming from your infrastructure, and on top of it, you can map it to say what kind of risks exist, and you can map it to regulatory compliance in a more automated fashion. So, give you some examples. If the data of a certain kind of data cannot end up in certain geographies, and there has to be a very clear way to ask simple questions. The data from a certain country, is it sitting in outside that country, or certain geographies where it's not allowed? What does it require? It requires that intelligence about data is there. It requires that intelligence and the context about the data, like whose data is it, context about the regulation is attached to the data in a more automated fashion. And your ability to ask these questions at a higher level with the lens of regulation, you can say cross-border issues. Are there any? Where are those? What are the root causes? Can you drill down like that? And then from there on, can you actually have policies be in place where you can reduce it? Knowing is great, but you don't. There's no specific ways to fix it or control it, then again it becomes an issue where you will try to use a big hammer to stop everything, right? So that is one example. Similarly, if you want to understand from the lens of the regulation, if you have the data of a consumer and it is being used for a variety of purposes, like marketing and sharing and with third parties, do you really know what kind of consent is available for this particular data set, or structured and unstructured both? People provide you ID cards and they provide you all the resumes and so forth. What can we do with this data? That has to be embedded or tagged and aligned with the data sets itself. What it enables you to look at from the lens of, let's say, consent, and whether are we actually doing the right things within the company for the responsible use of the data itself, right? Third example I'll give you is also goes along the way of internal entitlements. And entitlements can create significant risks, not just from the lens of cybersecurity, but also from the regulatory lens. Who can see which person's data? Where are they based? Where and if the data is going to move to a different geography based on your software is going to move it around, what kind of issues is going to create? Can you again look at through the lens of entitlements along the way? Similarly, from the lens of privacy, if you have to delete data of a specific individual, whether because of retention issues, because retention time period has expired, or because of their individual rights requests, and both have regulatory compliance requirements and severe penalties in some forms, can you automate this thing along the way? So clearly you can go examples after examples that if you have automated unified intelligence around data, because data, as we talked about, is going to be spread in multiple variety of systems. if there's unification of data intelligence, and if there's unification of controls, line item by line item, you can see it's actually reducing the regulatory risk and doing it in a continuous fashion. It's not relying upon some once in a year, surveys, or not relying upon manual tagging, or not running manual analysis. But this is happening kind of along the way, and you get kind of a dashboards on top of it, say that from a regulatory lens, the risk is looking low, and these are the reasons the risk is looking low, and the vice versa. The risk is high, these are the reasons, and I want to put some new policies and controls to make sure that the risk is being reduced. So no question that unified data intelligence and controls reduces your regulatory risk.
So Rehan, this is, I think, exciting for our audience that is listening in for these three segments, because there's huge opportunity, there's also huge complexity, but you've really sort of framed a unified approach to set up controls that will allow you to operate your multi-cloud environment with trust. And I think that's what everyone is seeking to accelerate their cloud journey. Everyone sees that potential, but these guardrails and automations need to be in place. And it's not, as you mentioned, this can't be a once a year, let's audit and find out if we're good or not. This needs to be built in, and if automated, it's continuous. In other words, these controls are always monitoring, always operating. And in fact, for our audience, as we've discussed over the last three segments, 100 companies came together. Security was very involved with this, along with companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, the top 4 cloud companies, and others, to spell out and give clarity to a common industry framework on what these controls should be, and the opportunity for you to implement this within your organization. And this framework, the Cloud CDMC framework, is available as a free download to all companies worldwide off of the EDM Council website. And I believe, Rehan, you have a download and site that they can visit as well. Do you mind sharing? You've been an excellent speaker. You have a great organization, and your company helps in these areas. Feel free, please share a little bit about how people can learn more.
Absolutely. I think I have to recognize the contribution that the companies and the CDMC framework has made. It absolutely gives clarity, jots down to limited number of areas you should be looking. These are the 14 controls. A lot of intellectual property has come into it from over 100 very well-known companies along the way, and we've taken that to heart. That if this is what needs to be put in place, how it should be unified and automated in one platform, where it's not silos of different places that people actually have to go, but look at most of these 14 controls. Can it be coming into one platform like Securiti.ai, and gives you one data command center where you have visibility and controls? So fully acknowledge the recognition and acknowledge that what contributions the EDM Council and the CDMC framework has made. And you can check it out at security.ai/CDMC. Security.ai/CDMC.
Wonderful. So, Rehan, again, thank you for participating. This has been an outstanding dialogue. And thank you again for joining me. And also, thank you to the CDO Magazine team. And please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.